Although reading is one of the most heavily researched areas, existing gaps in our instructional and intervention practices are leaving many children without the necessary skills to become proficient readers. In fact, recent data from the National Literacy Institute revealed that approximately 40% of children cannot read at a basic level, with an even larger disparity found among students of color and those with disabilities or lower socioeconomic status. WPS's ProLearn team is excited to partner and introduce Dr. Andrew Shanock, a professor of school psychology who specializes in the identification of academic difficulties and disabilities. He has been a featured speaker for a variety of educational professionals, including school psychologists, speech language pathologists, and administrators at the state and national level. He continues to work with districts around the country to support their instructional leadership teams and to improve student outcomes. I'm super excited to be able to have a conversation with him today regarding an upcoming webinar that we will be hosting entitled Collaborative Comprehensive Assessment within a Science of Reading Framework. So, Dr. Andrew, having you here, I just wanted to start just by asking, what are you most excited for people to take away from our conversation together?
Yeah, thank you for this. Very excited about doing all this and also talking with you is always great. I think the big takeaways are just the amount of effort that goes into the work that we do as school psychs and speech language pathologists, occupational therapists, and special educators of really how can we work better together to be much more efficient and much more collaborative in terms of the assessment of children one way or the other to determine whether it might be a learning difficulty, might be a learning disability, and to really be more specific about what we need to do for interventions. Right now, everyone's very overworked and just feeling the pressures of everything. Caseloads have gone way up, especially since COVID, and we're still doing some things the same way pre-COVID, and it's just really not helping us out at the end of the day. And we're just getting way too many people that are just being overworked and starting to leave the profession, which I'm very concerned about throughout all of education throughout the whole country.
Yeah, there are some serious ramifications of just the current zeitgeist of working in public schools. We know that there are teacher shortages, there are school
Right.
psychologist shortages, there are shortages of just all related professionals who are working to support students' growth in schools and academically, physically, cognitively, all those areas that you mentioned. With the existing challenges that are ongoing in our public school systems, from teacher shortages to school psychology shortages, to even just inadequate resources, right, to provide, whether it's those general education intervention supports that kids need in the classroom, or even those specialized supports that may be delivered through special education programming. Where do you think might be a good start for school-based teams to come together to help kind of re-envision the ways in which they are working to identify and support students who might have learning disabilities?
Yeah, I think the very beginning of it is just almost to have a long discussion about what is reading, what is writing, what is math. If I just think about academics, and I know that my presentation is primarily going to be focused on reading, which also means that it's going to be focused on writing as well, because you can't do reading without understanding writing. But the science of reading just sounds fancier in so many ways, but it's really reading and writing. And that's how well do people understand the different components of each, as well as how to do the different interventions of each. And I think a lot of times that, especially because of the shortages, we start to feel like we're rushed and trying to do things. And then when we have conversations with each other, we start to talk past each other. I may say one thing that people are interpreting in a completely different way. Does everybody really understand what phonemic awareness is? Does everyone really understand what the simple view of reading is? Um, I did a presentation once and I talked about Scarborough's rope, which some people know, and I'll talk about in the presentation as well. And the district was very excited about their knowledge about the Scarborough's rope, but then they were doing a curriculum that was completely in opposition to Scarborough's rope. So it's just an interesting thing of just how we're able to work better together, and we just start to miss the expertise that each of us bring to the table. And all of us are child advocates, and so sometimes we just get really put the blinders on a little bit, and we miss what other people are saying. And I also want to be, as much as I'm a child advocate when it comes to especially reading and writing, it's also really being a parent advocate. That there is just a lot of parents' babies are suffering and all the parents see it. and they don't know what to do, and all they hear is my kid's going to get extra help, but they don't know what that extra help is or what that means. And that we identify sometimes kids just put them in special ed so they get extra help, and that's not what special ed's supposed to be about. But what are those things that we can do prior to even considering special education that we need to address a kid's reading and writing and math needs? It just and how do we consult with teachers, and because they're working so hard to try to address so many different things, that we need to be a little bit more efficient at all this so that we can do more time in the classroom.
Yeah. So as you've been describing that, it really makes me think about the importance of establishing a well-functioning, multi-tiered system of support,
Right.
response to intervention framework within schools, which can be really difficult to necessarily replicate across districts consistently because every school community has such unique needs.
Right.
But it does seem that in the field, there can be some challenges in just simply understanding MTSS, RTI, and the problem solving practices that are needed to effectively utilize those frameworks. Because at the
Right.
end of the day, they're just the frameworks, right? It's the people, it's the data that should really drive the work behind all that we do. So
Hmm.
I definitely appreciate you tapping into that. As WPS this past year has launched our test of dyslexia, I've
Right.
supported district teams and working with professional organizations to support school psychologists, speech language pathologists, our dyslexia therapists, our academic language therapists. There's so many professionals that are out there that are working to support kids. So I also really appreciate your perspective of making sure that we're marrying the link that exists between language and literacy. Oftentimes, when people talk about dyslexia, for example, they'll think about dyslexia and a kid having a reading problem. But kids who have reading difficulties don't necessarily all have and meet criteria for a learning disability, right? There's some kids who just need extra support provided, whether it's in a classroom, in a resource setting, or just additional time and practice to learn and gain skills. But I think that brings up a really interesting kind of juncture of how we engage in these problem solving practices, because as you mentioned, with just some of the challenges of our shortages,
Hmm.
language pathologists, have their caseloads and the things that they're responsible for. School psychologists have their caseloads and the things that they're responsible for. The teachers have their daily things in their classrooms as well. And so I think each of us are just trying our best to manage the things that we're responsible and accountable for. But at the end of the day, we only tend to get together at that one
Right.
meeting and,
Right.
and hope that we can have a successful conversation that leads to some kind of positive outcome for the student. But there tends to be interesting things that can happen at those convenings of the mind.
Right.
So in your work and just helping us to better understand the science of reading, the basic elements and components of reading that then can lead kids to be effective writers, what do you think are some opportunities for those school level teams to kind of identify either data points or key indicators for them to kind of start improving those discussions that they're having at their school level?
Yeah, and it's funny, the big thing, and all the districts that go through around the nation, people always talk about data, but boy, I haven't, most are unsure of what data they're collecting. And how often do I hear the refrain of, well, the teachers don't know what data to bring. And it's, well, that is the starting point, that we're collecting all this data but don't know what to do with it. And in part of that is also, what are the components and why are we doing this assessment in the first place? People are just kind of doing the assessments because they've been told that's what they've been told to do by some district, by some other presentation, whatever it might be. And there's really no sense of it. There's no test cases. There's no piloting of it to try to get a sense of it and do things in a manner that we can have a real good, solid process all the way throughout, and that everybody knows what they need to do and how we're communicating some of those different issues at hand. When you talk about uh, even just the whole MTSS, that supposedly we were supposed to have three tiers, but then once you get to like the upper grades or middle school or high school, it really becomes like two tiers, maybe at times. And it's just because people are like, well, it's too complicated to do. And but then on the other hand, we start talking with educators and school psychs and service providers, and that there's not enough time to do these various things. But then when we look at the end of the day, that when you have about over 50% of your kids, and this is happening all across the nation, the districts will report about 50%, 50% of their kids should be getting tier two, tier three type of intervention. Well, if it's 50%, that means tier one is not doing its job at all. And if we just present that data showing that so many kids are below where they should be, wouldn't that mean that we have to do something different? Don't we have to start being more efficient in our collaboration? Don't we have to be more sharing and giving to one another and also giving each other grace about the things that we need to do? And that right now, I think uh, we're behind where we want to be, that there's a whole bunch of folks that know a lot about reading and instruction and whatnot, but then a lot of the people are unsure. They may know some of the concepts, but they're unsure of how to deliver.
Mm.
And so people are just trying to figure that out right now. So everyone's really working really hard. So I just want people to be able to collaborate a little bit easier by understanding what data means, what the different assessments might mean, and where are we over assessing kids when we could be much more efficient at that.
I appreciate everything that you just said from the heart of a school-based,
Yeah.
primarily in secondary settings, school psychologist, because those are certainly realities that I lived while practicing in that as well.
I,
It's
I mean,
interesting.
I could say just really, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I mean, like at the secondary level, I'm sure we've talked about this at some point, is just understanding that if I think about reading, if I just take the simple view of reading as decoding times language equals reading comprehension, if you can't read the words, you can't understand what you read. If you don't understand the words you read, you can't comprehend. But how many people at the middle school, high school level, the primary interventions about reading comprehension, when it really might be more of how well they're able to read words, decode words, and code words, or they may not have the language, especially those multilingual children. And so we're doing the wrong intervention with the right intention,
Love that. We should put
but
that on
not, but we're giving the wrong drug to address the actual issue that's at hand, especially the middle school, high school level.
And that brings up a really good point too, because I know that the other challenge is not just appropriate intervention development and implementation, because wow, do we really even have time to talk about fidelity
Right.
um, in today's interview and conversation here? But also, when it comes to the instructional pacing, at
Hmm.
the secondary level, there isn't really time built in for kids to be remediated, to be going back to what are considered those super foundational skills of phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, phonics, even understanding word stems and how language and all of those pieces kind of come together. And I know that that was one of the challenges we faced in my school as well, is because there are things we knew the kids needed. There just wasn't time in the day to be able to do that. And so it creates this mismatch. But I think that's where it just really underscores your importance of having administrators, those instructional leaders, the school psychologists, the teachers, and everybody not just on board, but also at those tables to have those conversations so we can speak up and make sure that we have a true solid plan for moving forward.
Right.
I also appreciate your comment about over testing. I'm trying to remember the statistic, and maybe you can think of it off the top of your head for the
Mhm.
number of hours that, for example, a typical school psychologist would spend conducting an evaluation for a learning disability. And I'm pretty sure it's in an upwards of 8 to 10 hours
Right.
total with testing the child, writing the reports, and doing all the other things that are required for those comprehensive evaluations.
Mhm.
So knowing that we're under these time constraints and also the poor torture that sometimes these children are being put through when we're presenting really challenging tasks, is that something that you feel can also be addressed through these enhanced collaborations, particularly among the evaluation professionals who are responsible for completing them?
Yeah, I think that's primarily the big focus of the presentation. It's really recognizing how many times do we have to measure working memory before we realize working memory might be a problem. It just, and between if I just talk about the school psych and the SLP, I'm not talking about others and who are also maybe involved in this and different professions, but sometimes it can be measured about 7 times. And then we get together and we're like, oh, you wouldn't believe how bad his working memory was. Well, yes, I got it almost right away. In fact, sometimes I'll talk to the kid and I'll say, we're going to do this task, we're going to rearrange numbers in a certain way. And the kid will say, no, I can't do that. And then I'm like, well, here we go. And then the kid really can't do it, but they told me. But then I have to, then after I test them on a Monday and say the SLP gets them on a Friday, they'll do the same exact tests I just did on a Monday. And then we say, oh, that's confirmatory data that they both did bad on both of those opportunities. Well, it's not really confirmatory data. It's just like doing bad on a spelling test to give them the same words an hour later. The kids can do bad on the spelling test. So it's where that all these I as a fan of assessments and also a fan of MTSS and making sure before I do any type of assessment, I want to make sure the kid was taught how to read or write or do math in the best way possible. If things aren't working, then maybe we go ahead and do our assessments. But if we're going to do the assessments, that the assessments that we do ultimately, in so many ways, I take it as very invasive. That if a kid's working memory or their reasoning skills or their ability to work under time pressure really stinks, how many times do we really have to measure that? How many times do we have to poke that wound in so many ways? And I want to do the least for the most, but also get the perspective of everybody from the data I'm collecting. That just because I think that my test may measure this, and when I say test, I'm really talking about a subtest or two, it might be more of a language issue. That language definitely impacts all my cognitive measures. And cognition clearly impacts all the speech language measures. So I may interpret a subtest or a construct differently. It doesn't mean I'm right, but let's have that conversation so that when we come to some type of determination meeting or we come to some type of conclusion, everybody has input on that and that we have a really good unified understanding of what's going on. Because the one thing I'll talk about is that it's very strange that if when we do these assessments, that means the kid is really suffering. There's something really going on with these kids. And if I take the medical model and say I have a kid who has 3 different doctors, would a parent allow any one doctor to do anything with that kid without consulting with the other 2 doctors? Generally, no. But yet in the schools, that's exactly what we do. Everybody just does their own thing without conferring with one another. And I don't mean what day are you testing? I mean, really, what are you doing and why are you doing it? And wouldn't it be nice to have that conversation throughout? And we can do that in an effective, efficient manner where we're not wasting all this time with communication, that we can kind of get right to it. So that's what I'm really going to be promoting and how to do a much more efficient collaborative model so that we write in one voice and we talk in one voice. And it's not just people cutting and pasting and putting their stuff into reports. It's making one really cohesive report in one voice.
Again, everything that you say just brings so much appreciation for me. Maybe it's because I'm working from a place of gratitude this year. But also it just comes back to that sentiment of working smarter and not harder.
Mhm.
And obviously that's the beauty of working in schools, right? Is that you get to be a part of a team and that there are multiple people from different perspectives and with different expertise that can come together to support children's learning and growth and development. So
Mhm.
as I hear you talk about these constructs and I think about how we can improve our instructional practices, our problem solving models, and ultimately our assessment practices, it really does make me feel that we can work smarter because we're
Mhm.
being more efficient in the work that we do. And we don't have to work harder because we're not double dipping and we're not kind of, like you said, going in after things that others have already allocated.
Okay, I mean, I think one big thing that I'll be talking about is that in terms of doing some collaborative assessment, if I just think of normative assessments, whatnot, that's not just for it's not for every single case. So you're not changing everything all at once. And in the discussion, it'll be really about how to start integrating this type of model into your daily practice. That to say that we're going to change everything overnight is not going to happen. That's really what are the simple steps to kind of take to start moving in the direction that we need to move as a whole system. And so it's not because God help you, don't take away anybody's templates, right? In terms of report writing, you can't do that. But that what we're going to do is start to work together slowly, maybe just look at what assessments have we all done in separate compartments, that where was the overlap? Let's look at that first and problem solve around how we could do this better. And then what's that first report going to look like? What's that first case going to look like? And then when can we start really implementing this on a more regular basis? Still not with every single child that comes through the door, but that we're going to be more selective about what we're doing and the approaches that we're doing. That's going to be much more efficient at the end of the day.
Makes a lot of sense and definitely excites me. I think my final note, as I reflect on what you've been talking about and what you're going to be sharing with us as it relates to learning disabilities, dyslexia, and even English language learning students,
Yeah.
is just that we've actually had a couple of webinars hosted by WPS in our ProLearn team, coming back to the theme of teamwork makes the dream work. And just whether we're looking at autism evaluations, whether we're collaborating across whatever different disciplines, just to ensure that we are truly addressing the needs of the student, but I think more so addressing also, like you said, that broader system, because there are lots of needs, lots of kids that are in need of supports. And most importantly, I think there's a lot of schools that are also itching to try and do something new. But again, that sentiment that throwing everything out the window at once certainly is not the best approach. And having been a practitioner involved in systems levels change, we know that when you change everything, it's hard to also track that progress and growth, but also you then overlook the successful things that can be working within that system. So I really appreciate just refining the things that people are already doing, making it better, not just so that we see improved student outcomes, but also we can hopefully reduce burnout, we can improve job satisfaction and functioning among those team members, and just ultimately have a happy and thriving school psychology or a happy and thriving school community. Clearly,
Right.
school psychology passionist here.
That's right.
Can't even
Right.
say school without school psychology. Um, well, I'm really excited. I'll be able to moderate the webinar that we'll be hosting together. So for us to be able to collaborate, it's been a very interesting journey just for ourselves. I know that I had the opportunity to meet you while you were serving as the president of the Trainers of School Psychology Association, and I look forward to seeing you at the upcoming conference as well. I've also been able to see you at a state school psychology conference. I've seen you at a state speech language pathology conference. So just knowing that you really are working in these spheres, that you have a huge level of influence, we're really excited that you're going to be sharing your expertise and insight with us and all of those who are able to join us as well. So we'll look forward to hosting that. And
Thanks. I look forward to seeing everybody.
yay, wonderful. Well, thank you again for your time today, and we'll see you again soon.
Great. Thank you.
Visit WPS today to start unlocking potential.